Death and destruction at the Mardi Gras Ball from Hell, and surprises await Malloy in Dubai. Hello, entertainment enthusiasts. This is Ray, and this is the Fandom Realm. And today I'm reviewing episode 7 of Interview with the Vampire. As always, I will be discussing spoilers, so just be warned. So let's start our recap of this episode of Interview with the Vampire. And to start that, we want to look back real quick on the last episode. And of course, at the end of that episode, we find out that Malloy is being very suspicious of Rashid. He remembers seeing him in a dream, and he isn't exactly sure what happened. And so he's acting very suspicious. But Louis continues his story, and it is all about killing Lestat. And basically what happens is David asks Lestat, how you kill a vampire, how do you kill an immortal? And Louis is going to answer that there were different chances, things like drinking poisoned blood, if you were thrown into a fire. There were several things that could happen, but you could kill a vampire. The only problem is, in this whole situation, Louis knows that Lestat is much more powerful than he is. He's quite a bit older, and so just knowing what he's capable of keeps Louis from taking action. Now, this is where we see Claudia, and she is fearless. And she has been working on a plan of attack to take out Lestat. And she basically just says to Louis, hey, I'll take care of it. We both need to do it. But just trust me, I'll make sure this happens. But you've got to be with me when the time comes. She also wanted to make sure that Lestat wasn't suspicious. So she never wanted them to get any distance away from him. She didn't want Lestat to feel like Louis was going somewhere else, or that Claudia was going somewhere else, even though Lestat doesn't really like Claudia. So some of the events we're going to start to see happen is that the house is going to be visited by people who are sick, suffering from things like cancer and other deadly diseases. And that's partially because they've lived in this area for a long time, and they know that people are realizing, hey, these 3 people have been here for a long time, and they look exactly the same as they did back then. And so they're being very suspicious, and with that, Lestat is going to feel like it's time to move. Generally speaking, he thinks all these people coming to the house are actually trying to kill him because their blood is diseased. So to get to the point of executing the plan to get rid of Lestat, Claudia convinces him to organize a big feast where they could thrive on people one last time before they go out of town. Lestat's going to agree. He is going to actually like that idea. They're going to pick the night of the Mardi Gras Festival. And with the Mardi Gras Festival happening, that was going to be something that would cover some of the things that they might be doing that they didn't want people to know about. Now, one of the big parts of this was Louis actually is going to ask, I think his name was Tom Anderson. He was one of the influential men in town. He was someone who had made some not very nice statements towards Lestat early on in their relationship. And Tom Anderson also had a picture of the 3 of them, Lestat, Louis, and Claudia, from years before, showing that, hey, I know something's going on here, and you all should be a lot older. They're going to end up making a deal, and Tom really couldn't refuse it. He had lost a ship during the war. His big business was shipping, and so Lestat and Louis are going to offer to buy him a new ship. Now, the Mardi Gras party was very important because they were going to have all these big influential people there, and then what they wanted to do were pick a few to take back to the house, and then they were going to basically slaughter them like pigs. And the way they lured them to the house is basically telling them, hey, this is how we are immortal. Sort of going towards, hey, we have this secret pool or this secret water that actually allows us to be an immortal. Now, part of the key to this whole situation was that Claudia planned everything, and Louis just sort of went along with it. And that's going to be a good thing when we talk a little bit later about what happened. But the great thing about the vampires is the two of them, Louis and Claudia, can talk to each other without Lestat hearing anything. And so while at the party, Louis is having some issues. He's starting to have feelings for Lestat again. He's starting to hear things, he thinks, people saying things in his head, sort of like a vampire, but he just sort of waves it off. So Claudia's going to introduce a couple of twin brothers to Lestat at the party. Lestat is very taken by them, and she actually tells Louis through the mental connection they have that she had poisoned one of the twins. Now, when they get to the house, they're just going to go on a killing spree. They basically show the whole group, hey, we don't have any secret. We're just going to kill all of you, is basically what it ended up being. And with that, they go on a killing rampage. Claudia ends up in another room with the twins. Lestat ends up coming into the room, and one of the twins is dead. The other one is basically out of it. Lestat seems to be a little suspicious. He pokes a hole into the twins' artery, and he sort of just takes a smell. And he earlier had smelled rosemary on the twins, and that's apparently something from their home. And then he reveals he smells something else. Now, it's at this point there's a huge reveal here because someone had opened the door. They had just shown their feet coming in the front door, and what looks like a guy comes into the room. Well, when they take off the mask, it's actually Antoinette, and she's alive. Everybody thought she was dead. So Antoinette had been following Claudia since she had seen her when she was purchasing the poison. She had been following Claudia and listening to Claudia and Louis's thoughts because she was a vampire created by Lestat, and she could hear the other two's thoughts. And that's probably what was going on at the Mardi Gras party with Louis, as he may have been hearing some of her thoughts, or at least that's how I took it. So Antoinette comes in, and she basically reveals that she's told Lestat that it was the twin and had told Lestat everything that was going on. But there's another surprise because it actually wasn't the twin that was poisoned. It was Tom Anderson, the first of the humans that Lestat killed and drank his blood. So Lestat starts basically dying. He's choking on blood. He's spitting up blood. Claudia basically attacks Antoinette, and they end up killing Antoinette, or at least getting her out of the fight. And then we get to basically see the end of Lestat as Louis holds him and cuts his throat and bleeds him out. Now, the big thing here that's going to happen, they are going to clean up. They do burn everything. We get to see that Antoinette wasn't totally dead yet. She actually was in the incinerator, and she screamed and was making noise, so she wasn't totally dead. But with that, you had a situation. They did not burn Lestat, and that was Louis' decision. It's shown he and Claudia argued over the fact. They actually left him out in the coffin for the trash to pick up. And so that would be the end of Lestat. And in the end, we get to see Claudia and Louis driving off in the car to catch a ship to go overseas. So we go back to Dubai, and Malloy starts asking some pretty tough questions, and he's eventually going to decide that Louis is feeding him a lot of bull, just like he had in San Francisco all those years before. And he's basically questioning especially why they didn't burn Lestat, and it is very heavily insinuated that Lestat's coffin would have been taken to a dump, and there are lots of rats and things in that dump, and he could have drank that blood and he could have survived. Now, they actually showed a hand coming out of his coffin to grab like a rat or something, but I'm not sure right off whether that's supposed to be something that was real or if that was something that could have happened. Tell me what you think in the comments. With Malloy becoming more suspicious and more confrontational and questioning Louis harder and harder, we're basically going to get the reveal of Rashid, and it comes to find out that Rashid is not who he says he is. He's actually one of the mightiest, strongest vampires, and he's over 500 years old. And Rashid's real name is Armand, and yes, he's a vampire. All right, now for just some thoughts and reactions from this episode of Interview with the Vampire. I've got to say, one thing that surprised me in this episode is the amount of blood and gore that we got to see. I felt like the first 6 episodes, they actually had held back on it, but they brought it front and center in this episode. And it worked. It was fine. It didn't bother me or anything. I was expecting this to be a lot bloodier than it has been, and so I don't have any problems with that. I liked in this episode very much how Claudia was taking the lead. She has become very knowledgeable of how Lestat thinks. We actually were told that in the last episode. She wants to think ahead of him, and so she understood that he was never going to allow someone who offended him to survive. So she thought that Tom Anderson would be the first person that Lestat went after, and so that's probably why she gave him the poisoned blood so Lestat would feed on. She was banking on that happening. Also, she's very smart. She actually had identified Antoinette, and Antoinette did not realize that. And we had some flashbacks of different times when Antoinette was watching, and Claudia was being very cryptic about things that she was talking about. I also really like this reveal of Rashid and him being a 500-year-old vampire. I hope they're going to get into more of the current story and everything that's going on with this death of Lestat. So as we move on into the future episodes, hopefully we're going to open up the story a little bit more. And of course, I can't say I dislike it, but in the end, we all knew Louis wasn't actually going to kill Lestat, or at least not permanently kill him. There was just too much love there, and so it did not surprise me at all that he left the body in a situation that there was a possibility that Lestat would survive. Now, to be honest, I wouldn't want to be Louis if Lestat and he ever meet again. I'm not sure where they're going to go with that now that they've introduced Rashid to the mix, or Armand to the mix. And one small thing I didn't like about this episode was that ending of Louis having this undying love for Armand. It seems to me that Louis is falling for the same thing over and over and over again. And I know love is strong, but how many times are you going to fall for this, Louis? So I was really sort of turned off by that. I'm not going to say that hurt my reaction towards this episode. It's not something I would take off for like a grade, but it's just not something I enjoyed. I think it's a little naive to think that would happen again. Now, with all that being said and done, it's time to give a grade to this episode of Interview with the Vampire, and I'm going to give it an A. It's a great episode. They pulled off a great plan. Whether or not Lestat actually ends up being dead, that's still to be found out. One thing I will point out that I just figured out is this is actually the season finale of Interview with the Vampire. I sort of thought things were coming to a head, but I thought I had read somewhere where it was a longer season, and so with that, I hope we don't have to wait too awful long to get that second season. Just to mention this season, I'm going to give it an A- overall. It has been rather entertaining. I think they kept a pretty tight story. Now, I am going to say I'm giving it this grade looking at one negative that sort of popped out at me in this last episode, and that is it broke one of my sacred rules. Don't kill a character and then bring them back just to kill them in the same episode that they came back in. I don't know. I just don't enjoy that at all. It just makes me want to scream when it happens. It happens a lot. It seems to me to just be a plot device that's overused. Now, I hope you enjoyed the review of this episode, and especially the review of the entire series of Interview with the Vampire. Please, if you did, subscribe to the channel, like the episodes, and comment below, and we'll have a great conversation. And I'll see you next time on the Fandom Realm.